Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to your next installment of Mr. Shuck's Flipped ELA. Today we're going to take some time to go over our strategies for our poetry unit. This short little flip lesson will cover some different strategies for talking to the text, analysis, and discussion of every poem that we read. So when we begin our poetry unit, we'll begin each poem with an initial reading. During this time, we will have our pencils down. We will be actively listening to the person reading the poem. We will have our ears open, our eyes open, and our mouths closed, unless we are the person reading the poem. As we are listening, we should also be thinking about what this poem means. Couple of strategies for reading poetry. Remember that the end of a line does not mean that you should necessarily pause in the reading. You want to try to read to the punctuation marks. A period means a pause, a comma means a slight pause, a dash would mean a pause. We also want to try to avoid reading poetry in a sing-songy type of a voice. This is not always easy to do, as oftentimes poets use a very complicated rhythm or meter during their poems, which almost makes you, as the reader, fall into this sing-songy kind of a voice as you recite the poem. Try to become the speaker of the poem. We will then do a second reading of each poem. During the second reading, we will have pencils in hand. We will be actively listening, and we will begin our talking to the text strategies for the poem. When we talk to the text for poetry, there are a few things that we will be working on. Number one, we always want to try to identify the tone of the poem. Is it positive or is it negative? And then you can get more specific. We want to try to identify the theme or themes that we may find in a poem. Remember that a theme is a repeated idea or concept. Whenever you come across a word that you do not know or that you are unfamiliar with, I want you to circle those words, and then we will discuss them during our discussion of the poem. Underline words that you think are cool, any words that just kind of stand out or that sound cool. Pay attention to the poet's word choice. Oftentimes, word choice is very specific in poetry. Connotation and denotation play important roles in poems. We will be looking for symbols. We will try to identify the style of the poem. Is it free verse? Is it structured? Is there a rhyme scheme that goes along with it? And we will come up with 2 questions about the poem and 2 observations that you make about the poem. And you will write these questions and observations down on your own copies of the poem itself. So when you're thinking about observations, these can be any lines, phrases, sections of the poem, things that kind of make you go, that's interesting. Anything that stands out in the poem, similes, metaphors, personification, hyperbole, any observation that you can make. So we're going for 2 questions and 2 observations. And finally, we will do a third reading of the poem. For the third reading, it will once again be pencils in hand, actively listening, and we will continue with the talking to the text strategies. Finally, we will finish each poem with an analysis and discussion. During this time, you need to have your ears open, your eyes open, your mouths closed, and you need to be paying attention to the person speaking. Ask your questions, the words that you don't know, and any other questions that you have about the poem. This is the time for discussion. Make your observations. I think this line means blah, blah, blah. I think that line means yada, yada, yada. Finally, don't be afraid to talk. In order for this unit to work, we need to talk. you need to share your thoughts about the poems. And remember, poetry is what you make it.
If you smell what the rock is cooking.